Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. I would like to thank Fundación Biodiversidad and the Spanish Climate Change Office. It is our privilege as Elcano Royal Institute, alongside iCatalyst, to be supporting the Spanish Pavilion in the design and planning of all of the events this year at the Spain Pavilion. I have a stellar panel of speakers this morning to talk about citizens at the center of the energy system. We know that moving towards a renewable energy system will require significant changes. We agreed at COP28 in Dubai last year that we need to treble renewables and double energy efficiency, and this is going to require not only technological transformation on an unprecedented scale, but also social transformation. We are providing citizens with the opportunity not only to be consumers of renewable energy, but also producers, so-called prosumers. We're also in need of acceptance of climate policies on an unprecedented scale. And this requires a just transition to be happening. A just and equitable transition that brings everyone along, that leaves no one behind, and that is not only fit for phasing out fossil fuels, but also fit for phasing in renewables. And in order to talk about all of these issues, I will very briefly introduce my speakers. Patrick Tonu, he's Head of Policy and Regional Strategy at Gogla.
Thank you very much.
To his right is Isabela del Alcázar. Isabela, she's the Chief Purpose and Sustainability Officer at IE. Thank you, Isabela, for joining us. Eugene, I'm going to just leave it at Eugene, if that's okay. He's the lead policy expert, just transition and energy access at the Pan-African Action Climate Justice Alliance, PACJA. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
And Walburga, also going to stick to your name, thank you so much, who's the CEO of Solar Europe. So as you can see, a great panel. And I'm going to start with you, Patrick, if that's okay. And I would like you to reflect on the issues that you have been working on for the past 20 years in terms of renewable deployment and citizen acceptance, that nexus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'll try and be precise because this is something I can talk about quite a bit for a long time. GOGLA is the industry association for the off-grid solar industry. And today when we look at the off-grid sector, look at first the number of people that don't have energy access today. The number is 685 million people from the latest data. And unfortunately, when you look back to 3 or 4 years ago, the number has actually gone up, which is a reflection that what we are doing is not working, right? And this is the industry or the sector that our industry has focused, which is how do we make sure that those who are living beyond the reach of the modern energy sector have access to modern energy. Because in the 21st century, if you don't have access to energy, it really constrains your ability to do so many things. If your child wants to be able to go to school and learn at night, how do they do that if they don't have access to electricity, to power? If it's a woman who needs to give birth at night, or somebody who's sick, or if you're a farmer producing crops, how do you do that if you can't pump water? So this is who we are trying to serve. And I think as we're having this conversation around putting the citizen at the center of the energy system, there are several slices that we look at that we think really need to be elevated. One, while we're doing everything we can at a macro level, looking at energy access, looking at clean energy transitions, the 685 million people that we're looking at live in the most fragile contexts, and we know that they live in the hardest to reach places. And the truth is that 40% of them, of that 685 million, about 400 million people, can only be reached using what we do, which are modern small energy systems. They are living beyond the grid, and you're not going to be able to reach them in a meaningful manner. That's number one, 400 million people. Secondly, if you look at, because these are the people at the bottom of the income pyramid, they are the poorest, and which means if you're looking at a system that says you pay for the services that you need, they are not going to be able to pay for themselves. And across the world, we know that energy, utilities, water, public services have always been a societal cost that's provided. And yet when you look at these people today, the global is telling them, you're living beyond the grid, we're investing in the grid, and guess what? You have to figure yourself out. So there's a problem of justice there. These are the poorest, and our current ecosystem is leaving them to figure and find out and survive for themselves. So we really need to think about how do we want to make sure that we can reach them with the technology that is available today? How do we lower the cost that is going to be through using public funding, public money, both from their national governments and also the aid that is coming to be able to reach those people that most need it? And then the last one, and this is a question that we get a lot as an industry, is that we also need to make sure that we provide quality services and products to them, because we've seen that sometimes when things go wrong, for the people who are living in the hardest to reach places, a product or a service is provided to them, there's no meaningful after-sales service and support, and if it fails, it fails. So we as an industry have adopted some standards. One, we're pushing governments to really adopt national standards on what energy products and services are provided. We push our members, and we've got a consumer protection code that you companies that are providing these services, please provide meaningful after-sales service and support. They should be warranted. They should be able to expect that the company that sells them these products stands behind them. And also the other element that we're looking at is how do we also make sure that we think about sustainability at the end of life, that we can collect these products, that we can also make sure that they are disposed of in a sustainable manner. So I think these are the elements. We need to think about the consumer, where they are, what their economic circumstances, and how do we make sure that we provide them services and we bring them into the modern fold. We think about how we can enable them through subsidies and support, and make sure that we also, whatever is delivered to them, that we stand behind those products. I think that's where I want to start off for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Isabella, I know you've been engaged not only in the education sector, but also as an investor and supporting startups in the health and the sustainability space. So how do you think about citizens in that space? So continuing with the supply side, and we'll get to the demand side in the perhaps Q&A.
Okay. So I guess my perspective is completely different to the one that was just exposed by Patrick, because the truth is that it's a very complex problem to analyze. We need to maybe apply some kind of methodology, systems approach, and so on, so that we start going into the different nodes or sub-problems and start pulling the thread, no? Because my mindset is more focused, of course, on where I live, which is in Spain. Okay, so I do think this is very enriching too, that we understand complexity. So when it comes to this type of thinking, which is the way I like to think, I want to divide the issue we're facing, analyzing motivations of each of the different stakeholders that are implied here. Okay, so if it comes to innovation and startups that are trying to bridge, for example, a need that is required by consumers, by citizens, it all ends up with finding not only innovative business models, which is something that we aim to find, but also innovative, not only policies, but regulations, I mean all of the framework that allows each of the different innovators to move forward their proposals. And for me, what's most important is that it has to be economically viable, and not only that there's a huge, or at least a good benefit for those involved. Because if not, it lies under philanthropy, and therefore you're always looking for funds and so on. So we really need to bridge the circle so that the motivations and the incentives that innovators have, that the citizens have, that the governments have, and so on, are aligned with one key actor here, which is the private sector. It can be in the context of a small company or a big corporation. So for me, that's motivations and stakeholders analysis.
And the win-win. Thank you so much. So what I'm hearing is we need to be behind our consumers. We need to ensure that we provide solutions, and we need to make sure that this is a win-win for everyone. It's not going to work if it's a top-down decision that does not benefit both producers and consumers. So we need to perhaps engage a bit more. And I'm coming to you, Eugene. I don't know whether you want to follow up with your initial remarks on that note.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. And thanks for having us join this wonderful conversation. I've been talking about these issues for a bit now, and I've been repeating myself. I was hoping that in this conversation I could bring a fresh perspective from the citizens' a point of view. You may find me from time to time looking at very detailed notes that I brought with me today. So that's just so that I stay fresh and consistent. Let me start by saying that the conversation is happening within the context of the transition to a low-carbon future. And on the continent, in that context, most of the African nations are facing two principal challenges. One is what Patrick did mention, providing electricity or energy access to the hundreds of millions without access to electricity. 680-something million, he says. And that's a huge number, and that's a number that doesn't seem to be going down. But also, the second challenge is that you need to do that in a way that does not increase Africa's emissions. And these are very challenging policy choices that African governments have to make. Because it means they must cater for the needs and the urgent needs of their citizens, but also comply with the requirements of the global effort to address the climate crisis. But how then do you put the citizen at the center of all of this? I think that's the central question of our discussion. And I believe that from an African perspective, there needs to be an approach that puts access first. The idea of access first is that whatever we do on the continent in terms of the transition, if it doesn't result in taking out the 180 million people out of darkness, then we have failed. In our work, we emphasize the fact that not only the energy transition, but climate action generally must lead to broad social benefits. It can't only be about the climate and the benefits that accrue from that, but if people's lives are not transformed, then we must have failed. So the policy choices need to start with prioritizing access. The second thing is that, in my view, is that there needs to be an emphasis on creating local value. Whether it's local value in terms of deploying technology, in terms of extracting and using the mineral, the essential transition minerals that the continent has, we can't remain in a model where Africa's energy resources are meant for export. There is need for a lot of that value to accrue on the continent in terms of providing energy for the needs of the continent, but also in terms of generating jobs and technical know-how on the continent. That's going to be very crucial if it's going to be people-centered. The third thing is that the financing needs to be fit for the continent. And there's been a lot of talk about how do you finance, especially renewable energy, which is only attracting about 2% of global investments in renewable energy, a continent that has been put out as having one of the best potential for renewable energy. But it seems that private capital is not coming. But also, it seems that the vast majority of people on the continent without access to electricity also cannot pay for electricity. So public financing is going to be very crucial. We must emphasize that there's enough public financing that goes into the energy sector. And that also means that we start thinking about energy as issues of rights and social justice rather than as a commodity that only those who can afford it can have it. It may also, in terms of finding some innovative solutions, that smaller microcredit and microbank facilities play a more central role because they're closer to people. They can provide loans that are easily accessible to the poor. They have been doing that for decades. And this can be an important source of renewable energy investments that are suited for the citizen of the continent. In a nutshell, this will not happen if the right type of governance doesn't exist. And here I'm really talking in terms of ownership and control. If you look at the energy landscape of the continent currently, it's controlled by a handful of people. It's the government and a handful of multinationals. Even the attempts to decouple the energy sector, especially the electricity sector on the continent, has still gone back to the same tiny bit of stakeholders. There is need to broaden and open up the energy space so that communities can participate in the production and distribution and marketing of their own energy. And so that it's not energy that is generated by some for the communities. In a nutshell, what I'm saying is that the model for Africa is going to be slightly different from the rest of the world. It's going to be one that puts the citizens and not the economics and the politics at the heart of the energy system. It's going to be one that balances multiple needs, needs of access, needs of development, needs of industrialization, along with the needs of addressing the climate crisis. And unless we see that in the continent there is need for a more nuanced analysis of how the transition takes place and how that takes people along, as you mentioned, then it will be a discussion that will end up in a situation where there is truly an energy transition in Africa without energy access on the continent. Thank you so much. I was a little long, sorry about that.
No problem at all. So no energy transition without social transition as well, and without energy access for Africa. And I was also, very briefly follow-up comment. In one of the analyses that we've made at Elcano Royal Institute, we're advocating, and it's on your comment on the extraction and use of critical minerals for the transition, the extent to which we need to be thinking about not only friendshoring and nearshoring, but also greenshoring, and how we can incorporate our partners in the green value chain in a better way, in this European Green Deal 2.0, with the Clean Industrial Deal that is coming very shortly, hopefully. So I hope we can continue that discussion. So on to you, Walburga. Please take us away with your take on how to place citizens at the center.
Okay, thanks a lot, and thanks for inviting. So I'm representing the European solar sector. Solar Power Europe is the European association which is uniting some more than 320 companies, but also national associations. It was very interesting to listen to all of you, because even if there's different realities globally, there's a reality where people don't have access to energy yet, and in Europe it's more about that that citizens need to be taken along in the energy transition, which is a huge change, which comes with uncertainties for people, and where it's more about bringing the benefits to the consumers and also convincing them about the benefits. In the end, the solutions are very similar, and I do think we can all learn from each other in terms of the solutions that we are providing. But to give a little bit of a perspective where we are in Europe to start with. So indeed, we're looking at a huge change of the energy system, where the consumer is much more in the center, or has to be much more in the center of attention and in the center of things. Consumers are coming from a place where they're energy and getting prosumers, you already mentioned it, and where really the consumer plays an important role in the energy system of the future. So the more we move into a system of renewables with a lot of solar in the system, we're moving into into a space where it's the story of people, right, that we are writing. And that comes with some concrete benefits, which I would like to mention first of all, and then deep dive a little bit on what the next steps should be. So concretely, having more solar, having more renewables in the system has had very concrete benefits during the energy crisis that we have been witnessing in the last couple of years, where directly consumers have been shielded from even higher energy prices, either because they had solar on their roof, also maybe sometimes combined with a heat pump, more and more so. So we did a study where we showed that in different countries that consumers were saving up to 3,800 euros per year. So quite a chunk of money, because they had direct access through their roofs and heat pumps to energy, but also indirectly, because solar has been growing exponentially over the last 3 years, and that meant a lot more renewables in the system, and that meant a lot more pushing out gas as a price setter, and that was also very important. So the first concrete benefit is really a financial benefit. The second one that I want to mention is that it is not just for those, and that's sometimes put in media, not just for those who can afford renewables and afford the investments, but there's a lot of stories and a lot of best practices showing that there is also business models around bringing solar to those who might not be able to afford the initial investment, because in the long run it's anyway the most affordable energy technology, but the initial investment sometimes is a hurdle. So there's been extremely nice best practices that we're very happy to highlight on energy sharing. Fortunately, we have also pushed it through that European-wide there should be a right of energy sharing. So just to give you one story, in Portugal, there is this beautiful kindergarten in Cascais with a big roof, where a company invested in putting solar on the roof. The energy is shared with the neighborhood, which is vulnerable citizens which are living in the neighborhoods. They are profiting from lower electricity bills. The kindergarten is profiting from lower electricity bills, and the benefit is also shared with that company that initially invested. So it's a beautiful example on how also if people cannot afford, this can be brought to people. And there's a lot of other business models that are emerging. So that's the second one. It's not just for rich. The third one is it is also benefiting rural communities. There is there's an application which is trending at the moment and which is great. We are pushing that very much in the center of attention of policymakers, which is agri-PV. So it's a combination of agriculture and PV production, which is bringing not only financial benefits from energy-related revenues to farmers, but it is also bringing benefits in terms of water use, in terms of yield. We just came up with a report where we showed that that the yield can be improved by sometimes up to 60%. Because of that combination. So there is also here a lot of benefits, which is keeping also your rural communities earning profits, and in a changing environment in particular, and then which has some side effects. And the fourth one is jobs, and you mentioned it already. We employed some 800,000 people in Europe end of 2023, and that number is expected to grow to 1 million in 2 years' time. So, according to the growth of the solar sector, also jobs are growing, and that are local jobs, that are good jobs, that are also jobs with a purpose. And this is also something which is bringing benefits to the communities. So now what is next? Because indeed, we're in the middle of the energy transition and we need to get the buy-in of citizens. So first of all, I do think what we need to make sure is that we are further pushing for solar to grow. There's a number of challenges out there which in the space of grids, which are in the space of flexibility, because only when renewables, only when solar is growing, this is a story of people, and people can profit from the energy transition. So we need to make that market further growing. But then the second thing is that we have to be very conscious of getting the buy-in of people, getting the benefits to people, and there's maybe 2 or 3 reflections and then I stop. First of all, I do think we need to pay a lot of attention on communicating facts and figures to citizens, because what we see more and more is that there's a lot of misinformation around renewables out there. Just yesterday, I talked to a colleague from Italy who told me that Sardinia is pushing misinformation about renewables big time through media. So they blocked every renewable development there because all of a sudden people were against renewables because of a lot of misinformation that has been pushed. So communication is key, but really based on facts and figures. And the second one is community engagement. So the development of renewable projects, of big solar plants in particular, needs to be together with the communities where these projects are being developed. And there are already some guidelines on sustainable development and on community engagement out there. And just because I see José Donoso sitting here in the first row, the Director General of UNEF, UNEF has been coming up with great guidelines on sustainable development. And there are companies who are happy to take that up and bring those benefits to the communities, engage very early on. Your deep engagement with communities to see what do they need, how can we help each other, how can communities help, also not just in the in building the project, but also further on in making sure that the project is being kept alive, and the whole monitoring is happening. So just one example, a nice project in Spain, Talahuela, probably I'm not pronouncing it right, a Stadtkraft project, which is I looked it up, in the city of Badajoz, probably also not rightly pronounced, in the province of Cáceres. Please excuse me. It's one of the biggest solar plants that we have in Europe, some 300 megawatt, more than 1 million panels, providing electricity to 150,000 homes. And they have been looking into creating local jobs, 300 local jobs, looking into engaging with the communities. There is a lot of attention being paid on environmental benefits, on biodiversity. So this is the way forward, and they're using your UNEF guidelines and are very happy and proud to be using them. So this is the way forward. Engaging with communities for these projects, bringing the benefits to the communities, and looking where we can have mutual benefits in order to get the buy-in and get the benefits also to these communities. And we can discuss further on, what that could be, and we have some best practices that we're looking at.
Fantastic, thank you. That a lot of data and high incentives. I mean, 3,800 euros savings. That sounds like a good deal to me.
Absolutely, and that was during the height of the crisis, where that was really very important.
And 60% increase in agricultural yield with your agri. Remind me the name again.
Agri PV, so agri solar, so really agriculture and solar combined.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so I think with this first round, I will, if you allow me, perhaps go in the other direction for the questions. So, what is the role of flexibility, Walburga, in this decentralized system that we're going to be, traveling towards, that we are traveling towards?
Yes. So flexibility plays a major role. I was mentioning that, in order to bring the benefits to the citizens, we need to further grow. We need to further bring down prices, electricity prices for consumers. So either you have direct access, then you're benefiting directly. But many citizens and businesses, by the way, will still get their electricity through the grid, and there we need to make sure that the electricity prices are coming down. Europe still is, compared to other parts of the world, a continent where we have relatively high energy prices. And only by having more renewables in the system, we will get the prices down. Now, that comes with the challenge that renewables also obviously bring volatility to the system. And this is why we need to make sure that we have the infrastructure that is needed in order to get electricity to everywhere, but then also to have flexibility in the system. And flexibility comes with a lot of storage. So we need to incentivize the uptake of storage, but also with electrifying the energy system. At the moment in Europe, what we see is that electrification is not taking up, so we're stalling at around 23-24% of electricity in the energy mix more generally, whereas we need to be at 35% at least by 2030, and even more by 2040 and 2050. So it has to be a highly electrified energy system in order to get the benefits to consumers, and and storage plays a role, and that electrification also brings some flexibility. Because you have flexible electric vehicles, you have flexible heat pumps, you have a flexible industrial demand, and all of that playing together provides you a 24/7 electric system where renewables can, to its fullest potential, play its role. And we just published a study where we're looking into all the benefits of flexibility, and it brings down, and that was my first point, prices. It brings down electricity prices, wholesale prices by 25% if we really go into a flexible system by 2030, and some 30% by 2040. So it comes with a lot of benefits, not mentioning greenhouse gas benefits that it also brings. And at the same time provides incentives for investors to further invest. That was a long answer, but this is really the core of it. We can't get to the transition that we all want to have if we don't have these flexibilities in the system.
Yeah, we haven't even gone into grid requirements and interconnection requirements, which is also, geopolitically sensitive, as we all know. So, Eugene, what are, in general, because then I will ask Isabella to complement, but what are, in general, the requirements for citizen-centered energy transition? What would you highlight as, the key elements?
I think it's some of the things I've already discussed, but and especially from the context of Africa, is that the transition doesn't have to be a transition of energy sources. It's going to be a transition of energy systems, which means that we are not only looking at what kinds of infrastructure we are putting in place, but we are looking at how that infrastructure is fit for purpose. One of the things we have been doing in our work in the past 2 years has been to highlight the relationship between energy poverty and climate vulnerability, and understanding that the lack of electricity, for example, is limiting communities' capacities to adapt to climate change, but also that energy systems and infrastructure on the continent, especially in those countries that rely very heavily on hydroelectricity, are becoming increasingly vulnerable to the impact of climate change, especially when they're experiencing droughts. And so it's important that we are not only providing electricity and energy sources to help people build resilience, but that we are also transitioning towards more climate-proofed energy installations. Otherwise, there's a great risk that investments will not amount to much. We've also seen, especially and unfortunately, but it's good that we catch it early, that some of the renewable energy investments are not fully thought through, and that they're creating new social problems for communities, whether it's land that's being lost as a result of installations of solar farms or wind farms. But we've also seen in the case of Morocco, one of the countries with the largest deployment of solar energy, that there's a strong competition for water resources, because these panels require quite a bit of cleaning. And so there are all of these problems that need to be taken into account as we design those systems for the future. The other thing I wanted to say is in terms of the decentralization that has been proposed as a solution for the continent to bring energy close to people, and that it's also going to be a decentralization that takes into account the competitive advantages of each geography that you take. So it doesn't make sense to bring solar to a community that has higher potential for hydroelectricity, for example. If solar works, provide solar. If it's going to be wind, so use the best available resource for each community. And she did mention interconnectivity. We are beginning to think that there potential for solutions. If we look at all of the rooftops in a village globally and see that as a solar farm, we're not going to have the same problems with land anymore. But that requires that we get into arrangements where there can be some sharing between households, so that collectively we are not going into communities and isolating households and putting wind farms, but we actually are creating a microgrid that can serve multiple households. And the third thing is that we need to have a landscape approach. We need to think about all of the energy needs in the place where we're doing. So it can't only be for lighting, it also has to serve agriculture, it has to serve education, and it has to serve healthcare. So these are some of, in terms of how we think about what the new energy system looks like, issues that I think we need to consider in the design of policies, but even in the narratives that emerge from our conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for mentioning narratives, because I think that's something perhaps if we have time that I can perhaps pitch in with the surveys that come out of our work, our recent work. So Isabella, on to you. I was wondering whether you could talk to us about how important it is for stakeholder dialogue and community engagement to take place. And another question, if I may, how can we get the buy-in from citizens?
So I'm listening to very interesting comments from everyone. For me, the key here is sharing a common language, okay? And when you, and again, I take my theme to stakeholders because it's easier for me, but you see the different motivations, and therefore, like, people come to the room, or they don't usually come to the room together. That's a big issue. So we need to generate those spaces where dialogue can happen. And it has to happen with everyone sitting there feeling comfortable to share what are the tensions that they are facing, how they see they could be collaborating with other people that are other times you might feel that they are kind of your enemy, no? So especially you see this in the energy transition, basically this is an issue. I've been talking with lots of people here at COP, and you go and talk to oil and gas companies and they say, hey, I'm looking forward to doing the transition and developing a transition plan. My issue here is, for example, that I don't have the right skills and competences to do so. Okay, so I need additional support. But I want to adapt to what the regulators are telling me, and I want to adapt so that the consumers are willing also to buy my products and engage with me. Okay, so oftentimes there's this barrier, which is that we don't have a common language, and that we're not willing, or afterwards when you talk to people, people are amazing, okay, and you break down those barriers, and there you see that when you put together people, you move things forward. So there's this skills gap, there's this gap of neutral spaces for dialogue. That's why COP is so important, and other initiatives that are carried out. There's also a gap in the access to the right knowledge products and information. For example, you were talking before on those different initiatives that you have in Africa or that have been going on in Europe. And many times it's the citizen that doesn't have access to this information and maybe doesn't have the competences to push them forward. So there are also other mechanisms that should be put in place to facilitate this happening. Thinking on how to bring in investments to these different projects so that we give access to consumers and so that we are also making the transition happen. Also yesterday talking to sovereign wealth funds about how are they doing this transition and where are they putting the money and so on. They shared with me something that is very important, and it's our models, our financial models are not working for climate risks. Why? Because all of my models are based on past metrics. So there's no way I can anticipate what is going to come, and therefore I'm not valuing right or adequately the different investments. Okay, so there's also a need not only for competences, to develop competences and to generate and for these safe spaces to talk, but also a need for more research, which is something good for universities and for research centers as ours, for more research on innovative financial mechanisms too, on top of the business models. So that's how I see it.
Thank you so much, Isabel. I think you've touched upon really important topics. The lack of awareness, the lack of knowledge. For instance, it's not our study, but it's a study by some colleagues at Red dos Red. They said that there's a large lack of knowledge about, for example, the energy transition, a just energy transition, especially so for women. So there's also a gender dimension that has to be thought through there in terms of energy literacy. And in terms of support for different kinds of policies, what we see in our results, and also linked to the extent to which we're aware of climate change and the extent to which we are willing to pay for climate action. I think there's still a big gap. So I think that those are very important issues that we need to be working on. I'm going to go on to you, Patrick, and I know you have policy experience, so I'm going to go on to the governance issue, because we've mentioned the guidelines in order to get citizen acceptance for renewable deployment, but we don't really have that well-developed plans and governance for citizen engagement for the phase-in of renewables. We have examples in Spain and perhaps in other regions in Europe, but it's not institutionalized. And I'm wondering whether you could perhaps reflect on which would be the key governance aspects of this citizen engagement for renewable deployment. So I'm thinking, can we adapt, replicate to the extent that can be done, the just transition contracts or the ecological transition contracts that we see in Spain and in France that are, quite structured to other regions in the world? Or do you have any other, institutionalized governance procedures so that citizens come in early on in the process? Thank you.
I think that's a really good question, right? And I think there's some lessons to be learned, both positive and negative, from some of the things that have been done in the developed world that could be replicated, but also understanding things that may be better off not being replicated. What do I mean, particularly with laws and regulations? I think one of the questions you started asking was around flexibility, right? And I think today it almost feels sometimes like the ecosystem is designed with the system, the energy system, or the existing system at the center, and everybody has to fit into what works for the system. And therefore, this is where you see questions around, and you know, if the citizen develops an alternate energy system or has something on their roof or needs it in this way, but you introduce risk to the system or you undermine the financial performance or somebody else's, then the system starts fighting you back. However, I think we really first need to look at putting the people or the citizen at the center and what do they need. And what do I mean? Yes, we need lighting, but it's not just lighting. If you've got a farmer needs water, right? And that's no longer about lighting. Or a farmer needs to be able to dry their crop or their food or to preserve it. In this case, we've seen this in developed systems or places with high levels of energy access where the decentralized solutions are disincentivized because you either say you introduce risk, but it means you leave people with unreliable energy access systems, or in some cases, I think we're seeing this now in Europe where people invest in energy systems, but somehow at the end of the road, I think it's reaching the point where the system may have to pay for some of that energy to be taken off from the system, which I don't think is the right way to go. So I would be saying, some of the strong things that you've seen in Europe is it's allowing through things like net metering that you can generate your own energy and be able to sell it back into the system. But you really want flexibility, that wherever you are, you can generate your energy to meet your needs, have as much resilience as possible. We've seen this, for example, in countries like Mozambique when the hurricanes come through and your whole infrastructure is washed away. And I think Valencia has seen some of this recently. You've seen this in the US where when you build systems that are reliant on this infrastructure that is climate vulnerable, you're not introducing resilience, you're creating weaknesses. So I would say pick up some of the positive things that really allow decentralization, the adoption of people to even generate their own systems, and look at them a most resilient ecosystem, make sure that it works for the citizen, drive down their cost, and even if the infrastructure, we bring in public funding to drive down the cost so that everybody has access for the energy that they need. It's things that we need to think about and really mainstream and push. And then I want to touch also what my colleague from PACCHA has said, which goes around how do we also make sure that we leverage the energy ecosystem to also look at your other impacts. Can you create jobs? Can you empower the local community to be included in both the manufacturing, the design, the servicing, the support, the installation, so that it's not all in a centralized way, are things that we also need to be considering now.
Thank you so much. I know, Berger has to leave, and I wanted to leave a few minutes for Q&A. So I was wondering whether anyone in the room has a question for her before she has to dash off to another meeting. We know COPs are very hectic, and we're extremely fortunate to have her here today. So please, go ahead, or I will shoot. No questions from the room? Okay, fantastic. So any final... Oh, sorry. Maybe we can get a microphone. The lady in the back.
You can share that.
Okay. Bonjour. You understand me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Fatoumata Diallo from Burkina Faso. I'm the French speaker, but I will try to speak in the English too. So my question is, we're putting the citizen at the center of the energy system, means rethinking the energy model to allow citizens to be not alone consumers, but also active players in the production, management, and consumption of energy. And in your opinion, what mechanism can be put in place for an efficient and effective approach to their involvement? Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, and maybe to answer it with two answers. The first one is that energy citizens can be directly involved as prosumers, producing their own electricity, but also consuming their own electricity, and more be incentivized to also consume their own electricity. Together with storage systems that people also have at home. In order to be an active part of the energy transition and also don't burden the grids too much. So that is the first thing. And I was already mentioning the different benefits, financial benefits earlier on that will come with it. That's the first thing. But then the second one is that I do think as a best practice when looking into developing big projects, big plants, big solar plants, but also other bigger renewable plants. We also need to look into really engaging citizens into these projects and maybe also think about financial benefits that we can share with consumers. It always depends a little bit on the needs of the communities, but financial benefits can be one of those things that we could look into. For example, some best practices that we see is that some projects are, providing lower electricity bills to the communities around the power plants. I was already discussing about energy sharing. There might also be other ideas, like, for example, providing some financial means to climate actions, to local climate actions that these communities are having. Crowdfunding is another idea. Lithuania has been coming up with that idea very early on, where people could buy shares into power plants and also have continuous benefits out of the revenues of these plants. So there's a lot of ideas that are still coming up and where citizens can be directly involved in their local consumption and local production, but also in the bigger picture.
So I was wondering, and this is a thought I have, you need to have some initial money to do this first movement so that you can profit from all of these benefits. So don't you think that maybe, and this is a question for anyone, or Lara maybe, that is causing more inequality, because really some people don't even have the money to start this producing. So all of the benefits are going for those who could anyway pay it, or that are more easily paying the energy. Yeah.
If I can come in here. No, I mean, you're completely right. And this was what I was mentioning in the beginning, that not everyone can afford the initial investments. But there is some business models which make that, this is possible as well. I also do think that financing plays a major role, that also the public has to play a role in bridging the gap between, investing, making these investments possible. Because in the long run, it pays off. So, in helping to get these initial investments done, either by the public, but also by very innovative business models, where private actors are coming in. I think this is the way forward, because indeed, this prosumerism needs to also get to those, and in particular to those vulnerable consumers, because ultimately it is reducing the electricity bills, but it is the upfront investments, I very much agree with you, is a hurdle. But there are models which can overcome these hurdles, and we need to roll them out much, much more. But then, benefits from big plants, they are obviously also something that can be directed to everyone in the community. Yeah?
But I think, if I may, to jump in a little bit, is also, particularly from the policy landscape, is a disincentive to particularly smaller individuals or communities to actually try to participate. Whereas, for example, if you want to start your own, let's say, micro grid or other to be able to support your community, in most cases, the red tape and the regulations do not give you flexibility. Secondly, if they try to access finance, whether if you're the government or you're a large player, you can get low-cost capital, infrastructure, financing, and all. But to get that, if you're a smaller player, individual, those your pathways to get that access is just not there. And it's really taking individuals and communities to go to your non-traditional finance ecosystem, whether you go crowdfunding and all that, to try and get that. So the ecosystem and the policy landscape is just not ripe or does not enable that, I think, which is something that we need to accept and recognize.
So you're leaving a lot of homework for the 4th International Conference on aid finance that is happening in Spain next year. Will micro-lending and microfinance for climate action be a part of it? I think it's a great way to perhaps think about concluding before we go to our
We have
next
time for one
speaker.
question?
Question? Yeah, go. We have 2 minutes, so 1 minute question and 1 minute answer.
Okay, it's a question that is... Come here and talk. It's a question that's complementary around governance models, and particularly self-regulating community governments of energy communities, self-regulation governance where you've got multiple stakeholders maybe in streets or districts or local communities that are ultimately going to have to do commodity trading in terms of who gets energy, when, where, how. Perhaps if you could speak to any of the lessons learned on setting that up well from the beginning, because I think it's really important for the way you structure new community participation.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. Sorry, while Berger has to leave. Yeah, sure.
So, yes, and I think you're right. When I did mention decentralization, one of the things that I missed was that you also need to decentralize decision making so that there's more participation. But we've also seen that it's increasingly possible that communities are not only consumers, but that they can take stakes in investment, which means that they're sitting in boards. It doesn't matter how small the investment is, there's some kind of governance arrangement around that. But if they have stakes in the investment, when they give up their land, that could be converted into stakes in the investment. And the more they are owning stakes in those investments, the better they accept, the better it serves their needs. And I think that's going to be very crucial.
Thank you so much for sticking to the 1 minute response. We are at time, and I would like to ask you to please join me in thanking my excellent panel of speakers and all of you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.